Hello, I'm Rich Goldstein. I'm a registered patent attorney, and I'm really happy to be back here on Freedom Ticket to help you with your seller journey on Amazon. I started out in electrical engineering. I was studying electrical engineering, and I realized that I didn't want to be an engineer because it would be working on too much of the same thing for a long period of time, and I wanted some variation, and I didn't want to work for anyone else. So I went to law school, and I became a patent attorney. And as I was graduating again, I realized I didn't want to work at a law firm. So I founded my own IP boutique, Goldstein Patent Law. So 30 years ago, I started my law firm. I didn't have any clients. I didn't have any sales. And so like any business, I had to generate sales. So I got really interested in marketing. And I did content marketing in print form in the 90s. And what that looks like is I launched a magazine for inventors. And so that was a way in which I got my message out there. I built a name for myself and I gained clients. And I'm really proud of my entrepreneurial journey. And so I'm really happy to help you with yours as you're launching on Amazon. So there are two ways that IP is important to you in your Amazon journey. The first is that IP can be an effective way to eliminate or at least limit competition among sellers of similar products. And sometimes that could be you taking down your competitive listings. And other times, unfortunately, it can be competitors taking down your listings with their IP. And that's why it's important to understand how to protect yourself. And also it's important to understand how to stay clear of their IP so that you don't end up shut down. And second, IP can be a significant contributor to your brand value. That is, when you go to exit your business, IP can have a significant impact on the paycheck that you get. And I was talking with Scott Dietz from Northbound the other day, and he's involved in a whole lot of mergers and acquisitions and was very involved in a lot of the brands that were acquired over the last several years. Now, the aggregator boom has ended. And during the aggregator boom, there were brands being gobbled up, and the companies acquiring them didn't really look too closely at them, didn't really look too closely about how strong those brands are. But what Scott was saying is that the acquisition realm is not over. It just has changed in that now the companies that are acquiring other brands are closely scrutinizing what they're buying. And they're really looking for that thing that makes your brand special. They're looking for the thing that makes them sustainable. And so they're looking even closer at IP than ever before, because IP is one of those structures that can help show that you've dotted the I's and crossed the T's. You've created a moat around your business. You've made something sustainable that's worth them buying and worth them buying for a higher multiple. So you might not be thinking about IP now, or you might not be thinking about exits now because you're just getting started. But someday you will. And the decisions you make now can drastically affect what you get paid later. One of the things that Kevin talked about was picking a name for your brand. And one of the things to understand is that descriptive names like pet food store are not protectable. But names that have little or nothing to do with the actual products, such as Apple for computers, is strongly protectable. So the more distinctive it is, the more protectable and the stronger the trademark. And a lot of times what happens is people want to register those more descriptive names and they have difficulty getting a registration through. Also, a thing to keep in mind is that those really descriptive names like pet food store are helpful from a keyword standpoint. Obviously, you want to show up in searches when people are looking for products like yours. So pet food store in your listing, in the name of the product, in the brand can help with that. But on the other side, there's trademarks to consider, because trademarking pet food store will not be easy to do if you're selling pet foods. And so there is a bit of a balance you can gain between those two, having descriptive terms that help with keywords, yet having something distinctive that helps to create a trademarkable brand. So an example might be cornucopia pet food stores. So you've got a distinctive element, cornucopia, married with the keywords pet food store. And then now you have something that's protectable, and you have something that will help you with the keyword aspect and being found in searches. One of the things that Kevin mentioned was that there are a lot of people gaming the system out there that are using these nonsensical brand names, something like XYZ123 system to sell pet food, right? But the positive intention there is that they want to have something distinctive. And we could learn from that if you do have something that is a brand name that bears little relationship to the product, those are the strongest trademarks. Those are the ones that's most difficult for your competitors to come close to. So you want to find that balance again between something that speaks to the customer and something that is distinctive enough that it's protectable. Kevin also mentioned that it takes about 8 to 9 months to get a trademark. And I would say these days it's taking actually even a little bit more. In about 8 to 9 months, we'll typically hear from the trademark office. Then it could take a matter of a couple of more months if it gets approved immediately, or if we need to go back and forth with the trademark office, it might take as much as a year and a half. So it is extra important to apply as soon as possible for the trademark. Kevin also mentioned that I'd be talking about international trademarks. Now, here's the thing. You need to have a trademark in the jurisdictions or in the countries where you're selling in order to stop your competitors from using that brand name. Because trademarks are jurisdictional, and your US trademark does not count in Germany. And Kevin talked a bit about how that works with brand registry, where you can get brand registry by, say, a German trademark, but that's not necessarily going to allow you to protect it in the US. For that, you would need a US trademark. So it's a reasonable strategy to get trademarks in the countries where you want to actually sell. But there are some great reasons for protecting your trademarks in other jurisdictions, in other countries. One reason to protect your trade name internationally is that it provides upside when you go to sell your business. If you've only been selling in the US, but you have trademarks in Europe, Japan, Brazil, etc., when someone looking to acquire your brand sees that, they'll say, wow, there's additional upside here. We can start selling in those countries and expand the brand. Because ultimately, when people are acquiring your brand, they're looking for upside. They're looking for ways in which they can expand it to be something even greater than you've been able to achieve so far. And that's part of what they're paying for. And therefore, they're willing to pay more when there's additional upside. And so you having the trademarks in other markets where you haven't yourself started selling will greatly increase the exit value. To the extent where you might spend 10 to 20,000 on additional trademarks, but gain millions in the acquisition through the fact that you've created that upside for yourself. Another reason for international protection is that you could prevent people from manufacturing and exporting the product from countries where you gain that international protection. So China, for example, there have been several nefarious players that have been going ahead and trademarking your brand in China and preventing you from exporting from China to hold your trademark hostage so that they could sell it back to you. And that's the reason why it pays to get a trademark in China, especially if you're manufacturing there. On the patent side, if you have a Chinese patent, you'd be able to prevent other people from manufacturing your product or a copy of your product in China. So a Chinese patent could be effective as well. International patents also provide upside in that it extends protection into other countries. A US patent is only effective in the US against having people make, use, or sell the product. But if you want to prevent people from making, using, or selling the product in other countries, you need to gain protection in those countries. The problem is, however, that international patents can be very expensive. And you might not want to file international patents in the beginning because you're not sure how much the brand is going to grow. You're not sure what the potential is for the brand. And so there are certain mechanisms for giving you additional time to decide about the international patents. For example, if you file your patent application in the US, you have a year to then file in the individual countries where you want protection. And there's one further step that you can take. It's called a PCT application, which stands for Patent Cooperation Treaty. So if you file that PCT application within a year of your US filing, that will buy you approximately another 18 months in order to decide what countries you want to file in. So, for example, you're thinking you might want to file in South Korea, Brazil, Japan, and China. You could file a PCT application before the 12-month mark, and then you have an additional 18 months to file in South Korea, in Brazil. Maybe you decide not to file in Japan by that point, and you file in China. But the point is then you have about 30 months to make the decision about the bigger budget. And within that time, hopefully you're growing your brand, you're scaling your brand, and you're seeing more clearly whether it's worth that additional investment. But in sum, the value of international patents and trademarks is that it extends your protection into other markets, and it provides upside for when you go to sell your business. Let's talk about patents. And Kevin mentioned that there are design patents and utility patents. I want to talk about that a little bit more deeply. So a utility patent is what you typically think of when you think of an inventor patenting their invention. In other words, that you have a product that is improved upon existing products, that there's a structural difference that provides a functional change in that product. And that type of improvement is protected with a utility patent. And a utility patent protects what you've actually changed structurally about the product in order to make it have that improved function. And typically, utility patents are considered more valuable, and they can be. But this is an important thing to understand about utility patents, is that they each have a scope of protection. And the scope of protection of a utility patent is determined by a portion of the patent called the claims. And what the claims do is they decide how much someone needs to do in order to infringe the patent. So a very simple claim for a very simple combination of elements in the product would be a very strong patent. But a lot of times when you go to patent and invention, it's not as different as you think it is. You think you invented the TV remote locator, but actually there are many, many other patents for TV remote locators. So then you have to make the claims more specific to get to the things that make yours different from all the other ones out there. But now you're limiting the scope of the patent so that the patent only covers when a competitor makes a product that includes those specific features that you had to add to the claims. So if the claims get very specific and it's really only covering a specific detail that's maybe not important to the market, then that patent's not going to be very valuable because you're only going to be able to stop competitors. You're only going to be able to shut down listings when they copy those specific features. So the value of the utility patent could vary tremendously. It can cover a whole new concept if you invented a whole new concept, and it could be specific into the details if really it wasn't that different to begin with. So it's often said that utility patents are more valuable, but again, this is all in context of the scope of the patent, of how innovative it was to begin with. There are also design patents, and design patents are about the appearance of the product. So it's the ornamental appearance that gets protected in a design patent. And when you have a competitor making a substantially similar product, that will infringe the design patent. That's, of course, subject to the prior art. That's subject to what's come before your product. For example, if you had a design patent on this, in a vacuum, you might say that this product infringes. Hey, they both look substantially similar, right? But then once you realize that there have been bottles around like this going back hundreds of years, then you start to scrutinize this patent more carefully. And you say, well, okay, it's not because they're bottles. That's what really makes them similar. Then you realize it's probably about the combination of ridges along the side of the bottle. And then you realize that this one doesn't have a substantially similar appearance because it has a very different set of ridges. And so the scope of the design patent is limited by what came before the product. So in sum, that means that the way you infringe a design patent is by having a substantially similar appearance, but they always take into account what came before the patent to decide how closely it should be scrutinized. And so sometimes when you get a design patent, there are already things in the field. There may be a lot of other products in the field. And so if there are lots of competitive products, lots of products that look similar, your design patent is probably going to be limited to the specific appearance that you come up with. When it comes to design patents, you protect the ornamental appearance of a product. And the way that you infringe a design patent is by having a product with a substantially similar appearance. If a competitor makes a product that looks a lot like yours, it's going to infringe. And that's the value of a design patent. Because on Amazon, people tend to knock off your products directly, exactly. They don't simply get inspired by your product and come up with their own design. They just make one just like it. So design patents can be a very effective tool on Amazon. And now a thing to consider is that the test of infringing a design patent is whether it has a substantially similar appearance to an ordinary observer. But there's a little bit of a caveat there. So yes, they can look substantially similar, but if the reason they look the same is because their bottle looks like your bottle because it looks like all bottles, but we all know that people have made bottles for the last 100 years. And so sometimes the similarity between them is just the fact that yes, they're similar because it looks like many, many other bottles that came before in the past 100 years or so. In which case, then the protection is more limited to the things that are novel about the thing that you patented. So in the case of these bottles, it really wasn't about the fact that they were cylindrical vessels with a screw top on top. It was more about the ridges, that the water bottle here has a series of ridges that are curved, and the other bottle then has a different set of ridges, doesn't look quite the same. So they're going to scrutinize the infringement based upon what made this product new. And that's important to understand because a lot of times in your field, there may be a bunch of other products that look very close, and you're still able to get a design patent on yours. How come? Well, because when it goes to be enforced, they'll consider what came before. They'll consider that there were already many other bottles like it, and they'll look more to what made yours distinct. The end result will be that direct knockoffs, people that looked very close to yours, will end up infringing, but those that are similar, simply because it's similar to all the other things in the genre, will not infringe. I want to talk about timing because, of course, starting out, your resources are limited. And so any one thing that you spend money on might be taking money from something else that you need to do to launch your product. The more you spend on prototyping or on your initial order, the less you can spend potentially on pay-per-click or on marketing. And so you have to be careful about what you spend money on. When it comes to IP, it can be expensive. And so it might be questionable about how much you can really invest in IP in the beginning. And it may be expensive to protect every possible IP opportunity from the start. And so a lot of times people have the notion that, well, let me see if I could launch. And if things go well, then I'll come back and do the patents, or I'll come back and do the trademarks. So it's important for us to understand the timing constraints that occur with IP that don't really allow us to circle back to some of these things and require us to make some important choices in the beginning about IP strategy. When it comes to patents, you'll often hear people say, don't I have a year to apply for a patent after I launch the product? Well, sort of. It's not really true that you have a year. What it is that if a year goes by and you haven't yet applied for a patent, it's absolutely game over. There's no possibility of circling back to it. But it's a bit more complicated than that. So let me get a little bit into it. When you launch a product and you make it public, then you immediately lose the rights in much of the world to ever apply for a patent. In the US, there is still what's called a 1-year grace period, which means that if you haven't yet applied for a patent 1 year after you make it public, then it's game over. But still, there are many different ways in which you could lose the rights and that you don't actually have a year. One thing to know about international patents is you need to file in the US before you launch in order to preserve the right to file in many international countries, including China. If you launch in the US and then you file for your patent a few months later and you later want to do a Chinese patent, you missed because you launched before you filed. I can't even tell you how many times over my career people have come to me with a product that's been selling extremely well. And I have to ask them the difficult question of, well, how long have you been selling? And they tell me 2 years, and people are starting to knock us off. And I'm then in the position of giving them the unfortunate news that it's too late, that I wish I could help them. And clearly they have the budget to have us do lots of stuff with regard to patenting their product. But because they missed, and because they've been on sale for too long, it's too late. So don't forget about this 1 year grace period as the absolute last chance. And also don't forget that if you launch before you apply for any patent, then you will have lost the rights in much of the world to ever apply for a patent. One of the most important things to know about IP is that IP that you do without IP strategy will likely be wasted. Almost any patents that you do without IP strategy is wasted. And that's where Kevin mentioned about using the Fiverr guy and low-cost alternatives and how that could really cause a whole bunch of problems. Not only will unskilled people be unable to get you the result that you're seeking, but you might not even be seeking the right result. It's like a lot of times when you're shopping around and shopping around by price, what happens is you're just looking for, well, how much does it cost to do a trademark search? How much does it cost to file a patent application? And then you'll get someone who say like, okay, fine, we'll file a patent application for you for X. And the problem is, it might not be that patent application that you should be filing. Maybe you should be doing 5 trademarks instead of this 1 patent, because that would be better in line with the goals of your business and better in line with what's possible with regard to IP protection. Maybe it's a different patent that you should be seeking. But if you're simply looking for, well, who could do this at the cheapest price, you're not going to have an IP strategy in place. And I think that's really what ties it together, is the most important thing. The best way to start any IP is with an IP strategy, is to have the right research conducted so that you know what are the opportunities to gain IP protection, and whether that would be either weak or strong IP protection. And then you could effectively point your budget towards doing the things that matter the most and doing them effectively. So keep that in mind. Let's talk about enforcement. When you do own IP, you could go into your seller account and make an IP complaint. And you could specify that someone is using your brand name, that you have trademark protection through brand registry. And you can assert a patent that you have if someone is infringing your patent. When a utility patent is being infringed, you'll often have to go through the Apex program, often called the Amazon Neutral Evaluation process. And that's a process by which you can have a mini arbitration against other sellers that are selling the product that you've protected with a utility patent. And the way it works is they get a patent attorney to serve as a judge for this mini process. Both sides put up $4,000 as the arbitrator fee. You present arguments why they're infringing your patent. The other side puts up arguments about why they think they're not infringing your patent. And then the winner gets their arbitrator fee back. And if you're asserting a patent and you're right, then their listings will be taken down. If there is no patent infringement, then the listings get to stay in effect. So in sum, it's really important to have a strategy. And if you'd like my help, if you'd like my firm's help in creating an IP strategy and dealing with situations that come up with regard to protecting your products and brands, with regard to any infringement claims that have been made against you, you can go to ipforamazon.com and set up an appointment with my team to look at your situation and see if we can help you. If you want to learn more about patents, I wrote a book for the American Bar Association called The ABA Consumer Guide to Obtaining a Patent. And it's written in plain English, and I'm happy to send you a copy. Just send an email to my assistant. That's assist@goldsteinpc.com. Include your mailing address and phone number. And in the subject, just put, please send book, freedom ticket, and we'll send you a copy of the book. Once again, strategy is critically important to your Amazon journey. Please learn as much as you can about IP so that you make good decisions, and good luck.